Phil Knight begins Shoe Dog with a run before sunrise, because the company starts as a question before it becomes a logo. He is back in Oregon after years away, living again in his parents' house, looking at old trophies and asking whether his life is already shrinking into something safe. The famous company is not visible yet. There's no Nike campus, no swoosh, no global mythology. There's only a young man running through fog, repeating one private instruction: just keep going. Imagine you are 24, living at home, and your best idea sounds ridiculous even to the people who love you. Would you expect confidence to arrive first and action second? The result in Shoe Dog is the opposite. Action arrives while confidence is still missing. Knight's crazy idea comes from a Stanford paper about Japanese running shoes, but the emotional engine is older than the paper. He fears a life spent on the sidelines. He wants work that feels like play, risk, identity, and motion at the same time. This opening matters because the book is not a clean manual about entrepreneurship. It is a memoir about uncertainty. Knight does not present himself as a prophet who saw the future. He presents himself as someone who kept choosing the next hard step while the future stayed blurry. For anyone building something now, that is the first protection against the myth of perfect clarity. Do not wait for certainty to prove the work is real. Certainty often arrives late, if it arrives at all. The first movement of the book is therefore simple and severe. Before the brand can be admired, the person has to decide whether he is willing to look foolish for a while. What turns an idea into a company? A spreadsheet, a mentor, a market forecast, or one awkward meeting where nobody has any reason to trust you? Knight's first answer is a trip. After Stanford, he travels around the world. Not as a polished founder, but as a restless young man looking for proof that his crazy idea can touch the real world. In Japan, he approaches Onizuka, the maker of tiger shoes, and speaks with more nerve than credentials. He presents himself as representing Blue Ribbon Sports, a company that barely exists. That scene carries the strange comedy of the early Nike story. The name Blue Ribbon sounds official, but behind it is mostly improvisation. Knight is using the language of business before the business is ready to deserve it. Still, Onizuka listens. They agree to send samples. He returns to Oregon waiting for shoes that may or may not come, and his family watches the slides from his travels while he quietly asks the question that matters most. Did the shoes arrive? Here the book shows a recurring pattern. The world does not open because Knight has everything organized. It opens because he moves close enough to opportunity that opportunity has to answer him. That does not make deception harmless. There is a real ethical caution here. Confidence can become fraud if it promises what it refuses to build. But in Knight's case, the bold claim creates a responsibility. Once he says Blue Ribbon exists, he has to make it exist. The next question is whether a box of Japanese shoes can survive contact with Oregon runners. The first real business model is almost embarrassingly physical. Knight receives tiger samples, sends pairs to his old coach Bill Bowerman, and starts selling shoes from the trunk of his Plymouth Valiant at track meets. There is no glamorous launch. There are runners, coaches, invoices, letters, and the stubborn belief that serious athletes will notice a lighter, better shoe when it is placed directly in their hands. Suppose a runner has only seen the same old shoes for years, and someone opens a car trunk with a Japanese alternative at a lower price. Would the runner buy because of a brand, or because the shoe solves a felt problem immediately? The result is practical. The shoe moves because it is close to the person who can use it. Knight learns distribution not from theory, but from parking lots, conversations, and the bodily intelligence of runners who can feel the difference. Bowerman changes the scale of the idea. He is not only a famous coach to Knight. He is a tinkerer who studies what touches the runner's foot. His interest gives Blue Ribbon credibility and a product imagination. The book's mechanism is clear. A startup becomes stronger when it begins inside a specific tribe. Knight understands runners because he is one. Bowerman understands performance because he coaches bodies, not abstractions. For a modern builder, the lesson is not to copy the car trunk. The lesson is to stand so close to the user's real pain that marketing becomes partly observation. Blue Ribbon's early advantage is not size. It is intimacy. A contradiction runs through the early chapters. Knight wants freedom, but he needs respectability to keep the dream alive. He works as an accountant, studies for a safer professional life, and sells shoes on the side. The safe job is not simply the enemy. It teaches him how companies fail, why lack of equity can kill them, and how quickly debt can turn growth into danger. Yet the same safety also suffocates him. The more he understands ordinary business discipline, the less ordinary his own desire feels. This is where Shoe Dog becomes more useful than a heroic founder legend. Knight is not allergic to responsibility. He knows numbers. He knows banks. He knows that a company cannot survive on romance alone. But he also discovers that a life can become solvent and still feel false. His father worries about him, and that worry is not foolish. A young man selling imported shoes from a car can look less like destiny than avoidance. The protection here is sober. Do not romanticize risk by pretending the cautious people are always cowards. Some of them are seeing consequences you are too excited to see. At the same time, do not let caution become a permanent disguise for fear. Knight's double life teaches him both sides. He needs enough discipline to count the cost and enough obsession to keep paying it. The pressure will soon move from private discomfort to a more dangerous public test, because growth does not reduce the need for cash. It increases it. Jeff Johnson enters like one of the book's great gifts and great irritants. He is intense, lonely, talkative, faithful, and almost impossible to ignore. Where Knight is often reserved, Johnson writes letters. Where Knight can seem emotionally hidden, Johnson turns customers into correspondents. He does not merely sell shoes. He remembers runners, asks about injuries, tracks preferences, and treats each buyer as if the company exists for that person's stride. Imagine you hire someone who keeps sending you long letters, constant suggestions, and complaints mixed with brilliance. Would you expect him to become a burden or the soul of the company? The result is both. Johnson tests Knight's patience, but he also embodies something Blue Ribbon badly needs: obsessive service. He opens the first real retail space, pushes for better systems, and helps transform a loose import operation into a living community of runners. The larger insight is that founders often undervalue the form of excellence that is unlike their own. Knight's strength is endurance under pressure, strategic nerve, and a willingness to keep negotiating with uncertainty. Johnson's strength is emotional proximity to the customer. A company needs both. If everyone is a visionary, nobody answers the letters. If everyone answers letters, nobody may make the dangerous leap. Shoe Dog quietly argues that culture begins when different kinds of obsession learn to tolerate each other. The next escalation comes when the supplier relationship that made Blue Ribbon possible begins to make Blue Ribbon vulnerable. Success should feel like relief, but in Shoe Dog it often feels like a new form of exposure. As Blue Ribbon sells more tigers, Knight becomes more dependent on Onitsuka. Orders arrive late, supply is uncertain, terms are fragile, and every sign from Japan can change the company's future. The more customers want the shoes, the more dangerous it becomes not to control the source. Most people would expect growth to solve the early fear. The result is sharper fear. Growth makes every weakness louder. A small missed shipment disappoints a few runners. A bigger missed shipment threatens payroll, reputation, and bank trust. Knight's visits to Japan become negotiations not only about shoes, but about dignity. He wants to be treated as a partner, while Onizuka can treat Blue Ribbon as replaceable. This is one of the book's central business lessons. Distribution without control can create momentum, but it can also create captivity. The protection is to ask early, which outside relationship could end the company if it changed its mind. Knight does not fully solve that question until crisis forces him to. The relationship with Onizuka teaches him that dependence can wear the mask of opportunity. It gives him a product, a beginning, and credibility. Then it starts to reveal the price. The story now turns toward a word, a mark, and a company that has to be born before Blue Ribbon is crushed. The strangest thing about Nike is that Nike does not arrive feeling inevitable. The swoosh is not instantly loved by Knight. The name competes with alternatives, including Dimension 6, a name almost everyone else rejects. Johnson dreams of Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, and the company moves forward with a name that sounds better in retrospect than it may have felt in the room. Picture the moment when a new brand must ship, the logo is merely acceptable, and the founder is not sure he loves it. Would you expect the right symbol to announce itself with magic? The result is humbler. The symbol becomes powerful because the company later fills it with meaning. A logo is not a prophecy. It is a container. At first, it may hold doubt, haste, compromise, and a deadline. This is a useful corrective to brand mythology. Looking backward, people assume the swoosh created Nike's destiny. Shoe Dog shows the reverse. The people, risks, athletes, products, and fights gradually taught the mark what it meant. The application today is direct. Do not use naming, design, or identity work as a way to avoid the harder question of whether the thing behind the name can carry weight. A good mark can help. It cannot run the miles. Once Nike exists as an alternative to Tiger, the company can no longer survive merely as a clever importer. It has to become a maker. Bowerman gives the book one of its most important forms of intelligence, invention by touch. He cuts shoes apart, studies weight, asks what the runner feels, and keeps trying to remove anything unnecessary between body and ground. His experiments lead toward famous designs, including the waffle sole imagination associated with pouring rubber into a waffle iron. Whether the detail feels comic or legendary, the principle is serious. Performance improves when someone close to the activity refuses to accept the given object as final. Try this thought. If a coach keeps damaging shoes in order to improve them, is he being careless or faithful to the runner? The result is that destruction becomes research. Bowerman does not worship the shoe as a finished product. He treats it as a hypothesis. That attitude becomes part of Nike's DNA. Keep testing, keep shaving weight, keep asking what movement wants. The caution is that innovation is not the same as novelty. Newness matters only when it serves use. Bowerman's authority comes from the track, not from conference room. He is valuable because his experiments are tied to athletes' bodies and measurable performance. For anyone creating products, the protection is to bring the work back to the real surface where people use it. The story then adds something products alone cannot supply: the emotional voltage of athletes who make a brand feel like rebellion, courage, and grief. Steve Prefontaine enters the Nike story as more than an athlete. Pre carries Oregon intensity, defiance, and a style of running that feels personal to the crowd. For a company still fighting for oxygen, he becomes a living signal. These shoes belong to people who do not wait politely for permission. His connection to Bowerman and the Oregon running world gives Nike emotional credibility before it has corporate polish. If a young company has little money but one athlete who embodies its spirit, what would you expect to matter more, advertising spend or symbolic fit? The result in Shoe Dog is symbolic fit. Pre makes the brand feel like a tribe before the market fully understands it. His death, then, changes the tone. The story is no longer only energetic. It becomes haunted. The people building Nike are reminded that bodies are fragile, time is short, and a life organized around running still cannot outrun loss. This emotional turn prevents the book from becoming a simple victory march. Nike's rise is tied to joy, obsession, competition, and mourning. The application is not to chase celebrity at any cost. It is to understand that a brand becomes powerful when it is attached to real human meaning. The protection is to avoid confusing borrowed charisma with a durable company. Pre gives Nike fire, but fire still needs fuel, product, cash, distribution, and a team that can survive the next emergency. The middle of Shoe Dog is dominated by a phrase that sounds almost religious: pay Nisho first. Nisho Iwai becomes the lender and trading partner that helps Nike survive when conventional banks see too much risk. Night sales keep rising, but rising sales do not mean safety. Inventory has to be financed before it is sold. Banks want caution. Customers want shoes. Employees want payroll. Growth becomes a machine that eats cash before it produces pride. Imagine your company is selling more every year, yet every morning you fear that one bank decision could end it. Would you call that success or danger? The result is both. Knight learns that high growth can feel like drowning upward. The more Nike sells, the more it owes, and the less patient traditional lenders become. Nisho's support gives the company room to breathe, but also keeps pressure on every decision. This is one of the strongest practical lessons in the book. Revenue is not the same as freedom. Demand can kill a company if the operating system cannot carry it. The protection for a builder is to respect cash conversion, financing terms, inventory risk, and the human cost of permanent urgency. Knight's genius is not only dreaming big, it is enduring the humiliating financial grind behind the dream. The next crisis shows that even survival money is not enough when the old supplier becomes a legal enemy. The break with Onizuka turns the founding relationship into a fight. What began as an improbable chance for a young American importer becomes a struggle over territory, loyalty, and survival. Knight discovers that a partner can be essential and still become dangerous. The lawsuit forces Blue Ribbon and Nike to defend not only contracts, but the right to continue as themselves. Here is the uncomfortable question. If the relationship that gave you your start now threatens your future, should gratitude keep you loyal, or should survival make you leave? The result in Shoe Dog is not emotionally clean. Knight needs what Onizuka provided, but he also sees that staying dependent could destroy the company. The courtroom scenes, lawyers, documents, and stress give the memoir a different texture. This is not the romance of a garage startup. It is institutional conflict. The caution is important. Independence often sounds noble after it succeeds, but in the moment it may look like betrayal, panic, and legal exposure. Knight's choice asks the viewer to separate sentiment from structure. Gratitude matters. So, does control over the thing you are building. A company that cannot protect its supply, name, and future is not fully free. After this break, Nike can no longer define itself against Tiger alone. It must prove that its own products, people, and culture can carry the weight. Nike's internal culture in the book is funny, harsh, loyal, and often strange. The Buttfaces gatherings capture the mood. People mock one another, argue fiercely, and keep returning to the work. Knight surrounds himself with intense characters. Johnson, Waddell, Hayes, Strasser, and others who bring different forms of obsession. Some are operational, some legal, some financial, some emotional. The company becomes less like a polished hierarchy and more like a band of difficult believers. If you watched that group from the outside, would you expect dysfunction or commitment? The result is both again. The roughness creates energy, but it also carries risk. A culture built on pressure and inside jokes can bond people who choose it, while exhausting people who cannot or should not live inside it. Shoe Dog is honest enough to show loyalty without making the workplace sound gentle. The application today is to distinguish between high standards and avoidable harm. The book celebrates stamina, irreverence, and shared belief, but also shows how much strain gets pushed onto families, bodies, and private lives. Knight's marriage to Penny, his children, and his friends are not background decorations. They are part of the cost ledger. A serious reading of Shoe Dog must admire the team's commitment without pretending that commitment is free. The company is growing larger, and the costs become harder to hide. As Nike expands, the story moves from Oregon tracks and Japanese meetings into a broader global machine. Factories, shipping, customs, currency, quality, and scale become part of the drama. The company that began with a runner's foot now has to manage production across borders. Every gain in size multiplies distance between the original feeling and the systems required to serve it. Ask the hard question. When a company built on athletic freedom depends on complex overseas manufacturing, what could go wrong even if the founders still love the product? The result is that operations become moral as well as technical. Shoe Dog spends much of its energy on survival, but survival at scale raises questions the early car trunk business never had to face. Quality failures hurt customers. Factory decisions affect workers. Customs fights can threaten the company. Speed can hide consequences. The protection is not cynicism. It is attention. A creator should not assume that a good origin story purifies every later choice. Nike's origin is inspiring because it is human and specific. That does not remove the obligation to examine power when the company becomes powerful. Knight's memoir is strongest when it lets both truths stand. The dream was real, and the machine became enormous. The next breakthroughs show why the machine kept attracting talent and belief anyway. Frank Rudy's aerosol idea gives the later Nike story another reminder that innovation often arrives looking odd. A former aerospace engineer proposes putting air into the sole of a running shoe. At first, the idea can sound like a gimmick, but Nike's culture has been trained by Bowerman to take strange performance ideas seriously enough to test them. The company survives because it does not let the first winning formula become a prison. Imagine you already fought to establish your own shoes, and now someone brings a technology that sounds too unusual for the market. Would you protect the existing line, or risk confusing people with something new? The result is that Nike keeps betting on product imagination. The exact path is messy, but the principle is consistent. The runner's experience remains the judge. Athletes also become partners in meaning. Nike's relationship with sport is commercial, but in the memoir, it is not only commercial. Knight and his team love competition, bodies, records, and the drama of effort. That love does not excuse every decision, but it explains why the brand can feel alive. A company renews itself when product, user, and story keep challenging one another. If the product stops improving, the story becomes hollow. If the story disappears, the product becomes anonymous. Nike's power comes from keeping those forces in conversation. The 1980 IPO gives the outside world a clean milestone, but Shoe Dog refuses to make it feel like a fairy tale ending. Going public creates wealth, recognition, and relief, yet it also changes the nature of the company. The private band of fighters becomes accountable to a broader market. The numbers that once threatened to kill the company now announce its value. Most people would expect the public offering to deliver pure triumph. The result is quieter and more complicated. Knight feels gratitude, disbelief, and distance from the young man who once waited for shoe samples in his parents' house. The IPO proves that the crazy idea worked, but it cannot return the years, repair every strain, or make the journey morally simple. Success answers one question and opens another. What does a person become after the chase finally works? This is where the memoir's philosophy sharpens. The chase matters, but the chase is not innocent. It consumes attention. It rewards persistence and also hides neglect. It creates jobs, products, memories, and wealth while asking families and friends to absorb uncertainty for years. A mature reading of Shoe Dog does not say, "Take bigger risks and everything will be fine." It says, if you choose a calling, tell the truth about what it demands. The final chapters turn that truth inward. The later reflections in Shoe Dog bring family and grief closer to the center. Penny's patience, the son's distance from sport, and the devastating loss of Matthew complicate any simple celebration. Knight can look at Nike and see victory, but he can also look at his life and see absence, apology, and unanswered questions. The memoir does not let the reader believe that public success pays every private debt. Suppose the dream works, the company becomes famous, and the world calls the founder successful. What would you expect the final feeling to be? Completion or a more honest inventory? The result is inventory. Knight is grateful, but gratitude is not the same as erasure. He remembers people who carried the company, people who died, people he failed to fully understand, and moments when the work took more than he knew it was taking. This is the book's deepest caution. Building can give life meaning, but it can also become a way to postpone other forms of attention. The protection is to ask during the chase, not only after it, what the work is costing and who is paying. Shoe Dog remains inspiring because Knight does not pretend the cost disappears. He lets the reader feel both the glory of making something and the ache of what making something can displace. So what should a person do with Shoe Dog? Not worship Nike, not copy Knight's every risk, not mistake exhaustion for virtue. The useful question is smaller and harder. What work would you keep protecting when embarrassment, delay, debt, and uncertainty remove the glamour? Knight's answer is not a slogan pasted on a wall. It is a long sequence of uncomfortable decisions that slowly make the slogan believable. The run before sunrise becomes the final image. Keep moving, but know what the movement costs. The larger lesson is that a calling is not proved by confidence. It is proved by repeated honest action under pressure. The practical step is small. Choose the work you would still protect when the first plan fails. That could be a company, a craft, a study path, a family duty, or a private discipline. The point is not scale. The point is whether the work can survive contact with reality. Do not worship the logo. Watch the person who kept running before anyone knew what the logo meant. Shoe Dog leaves us with a paradox. The dream has to be strong enough to pull you forward, but your honesty has to be stronger than the dream. Keep going is powerful only when it includes looking at the cost, correcting the course, thanking the people who carried you, and refusing to turn success into a myth that erases the struggle that made it human.